Just one sentence that Donald Trump said on June 9th, 2026. And I want you to hold this sentence for the next 25 minutes. Because this sentence, spoken publicly, on the record, with his name attached, just changed the entire architecture of this conflict more than any missile, any bombing campaign, or any naval blockade has changed it in months of war. Trump said this. Al Jazeera reported it directly. He said, "Bibi, you better be careful, or you will be on your own very soon." 6 words, not a military operation, not a sanctions package, not a diplomatic ultimatum delivered through back channels in Islamabad or Doha. 6 words, public, on the record, to the Prime Minister of Israel. And mainstream media is covering this as a story about 2 allies having a disagreement. Israel's ambassador to Washington told Fox News, and I want you to hear this phrase carefully because it tells you everything about how the Israeli government wants the world to interpret this moment. He said, "This is what happens when lovers have a spat, a lover's spat." That is the official Israeli characterization of the most significant public fracture in the U.S.-Israel relationship in decades. But today I want to show you something completely different. I want to show you that what happened on June 9th, 2026 is not a story about Trump and Netanyahu at all. It is not a story about 2 allies disagreeing about tactics. It is not a story about an American president losing patience with a regional partner. It is a story about Iran. Specifically, it is a story about how Iran, a country Trump has publicly said has no navy, no air force, no leadership, and 250% inflation, just achieved in 48 hours what it could not achieve in months of direct military confrontation. Iran separated Trump from Netanyahu without firing a single additional missile on June 9th. And today I want to show you exactly how they did it, step by step, with the actual evidence. Using sources that are not Iranian, not Russian, not from any government with an interest in making America look weak. Using American officials, American media, and the actual timeline of events that nobody in cable news is connecting together into a single coherent picture. Let us go. Part 1. The 48-hour sequence that nobody is connecting. I need to give you the precise timeline of the last 48 hours, because in geopolitics, the order of events is not just important, it is everything. Change the order, and you get a completely different story. Keep the order exactly as it happened, and the picture becomes unavoidable. On June 7, 2026, United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and seized between $12 and $24 billion of Iranian frozen assets. This money was handed directly to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait as war compensation. Now, I need you to understand why this matters far beyond the dollar amount. For weeks, through the Pakistani mediation channel, the only active diplomatic back channel that existed between Washington and Tehran, Iran had maintained one single non-negotiable precondition for any peace negotiation. One condition, not 10, not 5, 1. Release our frozen assets, and we will negotiate. Release our frozen assets, and we will discuss opening the Strait of Hormuz. Release our frozen assets, and there is a path forward. That was the door, the only door leading anywhere close to a diplomatic resolution. On the morning of June 7th, America did not just refuse to open that door, they removed it from its hinges, burned it to the ground, and handed the ashes to Riyadh. That same afternoon, Israel struck the Dahieh neighborhood in the southern suburbs of Beirut. 2 people killed, 11 wounded. But here is the detail that changes everything. 5 days before this attack, exactly 5 days, the Kataib Central Headquarters, which is Iran's central war command structure, issued a public warning in 3 languages simultaneously: Hebrew, Farsi, Arabic. The warning was explicit and unambiguous. Any Israeli attack on Dahieh will immediately trigger Operation True Promise 5. 3 languages, 5 days in advance, broadcast widely across every major regional media platform. Iran could not have been more explicit about where their red line was. Israel crossed it anyway, and Iran's mosaic defense, 31 independent IRGC provincial commands across Iran, each with pre-delegated firing authority, each authorized in advance to initiate strikes independently the moment a predetermined trigger condition is confirmed. Activated within hours, not days, not after a cabinet meeting, not after consulting with the Supreme Leader's office. Hours. Waves of ballistic missiles launched directly at the Ramat David Air Base in northern Israel. 3 separate waves, coordinated, precise. Then, on the morning of June 8th, CNN reported that Netanyahu canceled additional Iran strikes after a direct call from Trump. Not after Israeli military assessment, not after Israeli cabinet deliberation, after Trump called and asked him to stop. And then on June 9th, Al Jazeera reported that Trump told the world publicly, Bibi, you better be careful, or you will be on your own very soon. Now I want you to look at that complete sequence and ask yourself one question, one honest question. At the end of that 48-hour sequence, who is in a stronger position and who is in a weaker one? Iran fired. Iran demonstrated full operational capability. Iran activated its published doctrine exactly as advertised. Iran forced a direct Trump-Netanyahu phone call, and then Iran paused, on its own terms, without any military pressure compelling it to stop. And the result was Trump publicly distancing himself from Netanyahu on the record for the entire world to see. That is not a country that is losing. Part 2. What "you're on your own" actually means in geopolitical language. I need to spend time on this because the phrase sounds different in ordinary conversation than it does in the language of international relations. And if you hear it the ordinary way, you will completely miss what just happened. When an ordinary person says you are on your own, it might mean I'm frustrated. It might mean our relationship is strained. It might mean nothing changes tomorrow. People say it in arguments all the time, and then go back to normal the next day. When the President of the United States says you are on your own to the Prime Minister of Israel, publicly on the record to Axios, which published it for the entire world, it means something categorically different. It means the security guarantee just became conditional. And I want you to understand what Israel's entire strategic position in this region is built upon. It is not built on Israel's military power alone. Israel's military power is substantial, but it operates within a framework. That framework is the foundational assumption that America will always be there, that American weapons will always flow. The bunker buster bombs, the cruise missiles, the precision guidance systems. That American air defense will always protect Israeli skies. The Aegis destroyers in the eastern Mediterranean, the early warning data, the mid-course trajectory tracking. That American intelligence will always feed Israeli strike packages. That American diplomatic cover at the United Nations will always shield Israel from international consequences. That assumption, that permanent, unconditional American backing, is what makes Israel's military operations sustainable. Not just possible, sustainable over time. Al Jazeera reported directly that Trump told Axios Israel gave him very late notice about Sunday's strikes. He said they were already on their way, but that he eventually had the strike limited. Read that very carefully. Trump is saying publicly that Israel launched strikes that America did not fully authorize in advance. Israel was already in the air. Trump found out late. He managed to limit the operation but not stop it entirely. That is not a lover's spat. That is the President of the United States publicly establishing on the record that there is a limit to what he will tolerate from his closest regional ally. And that limit has now been reached, and every government in the Middle East heard that statement. Saudi Arabia heard it, the UAE heard it, Kuwait heard it, Jordan heard it, Egypt heard it, and every one of them is now running the same quiet calculation in their foreign ministries and their royal palaces. If American backing of Israel is conditional, if Trump can say you will be on your own and mean it even partially, then what does that mean for American backing of us when our interests diverge from Washington's? The regional security architecture just shifted, not because of a missile strike, not because of a naval confrontation, because of 6 words spoken publicly by an American president who desperately wants a deal. Part 3. Iran's strategic calculation and why nobody is crediting it. This is the part I want to spend the most time on because it is the most analytically important and simultaneously the most completely ignored by mainstream media. Iran engineered this outcome, not accidentally, not through luck, not through desperation, through a strategic sequence that was more sophisticated than anything Washington's war planners anticipated when this conflict began. Let me show you exactly how. Al Jazeera reported that Iran has long maintained that any peace deal with the United States depends in part on an end to the fighting in Lebanon. This condition, peace requires Israel to stop attacking Lebanon, sounds on the surface like a negotiating position. It sounds like something Iran says to extract better terms, something it might eventually trade away for sanctions relief or asset unfreezing. Most Western analysts treated it exactly that way. A bargaining chip, an opening position. It was not a bargaining chip, it was a trap. And here is why. Iran knew, with complete certainty, based on months of observing Netanyahu's domestic political situation, that Israel would not stop attacking Lebanon voluntarily. Netanyahu's political survival depends on projecting absolute military strength. His main political rival, Naftali Bennett, had already said publicly that any accommodation with American pressure would prove Israel is no longer a sovereign state. Netanyahu cannot afford to look like he takes orders from Washington. He needs, politically, existentially, to look like an independent commander who acts on Israeli interests alone, regardless of what any foreign leader says. So Netanyahu would keep attacking Lebanon, not because of military necessity alone, because of domestic political necessity. Iran knew this, so Iran set its red line specifically at Lebanon, knowing Israel would cross it, knowing that when Israel crossed it, Iran's mosaic defense would automatically respond, not as a political decision from Tehran, but as an automatic military activation that no Iranian official needed to authorize in the moment. Knowing that when Iran responded with precision ballistic missiles, Trump would be forced into an impossible position. Choose between backing Netanyahu's continued escalation, which threatens the deal Trump desperately wants, or publicly distancing from Netanyahu to protect the deal. CNN reported that Trump told ABC News directly, "I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt the deal." He said he told Netanyahu to use his own judgment, but made clear the deal cannot be hurt. Use your own judgment, but don't hurt the deal. That is Trump choosing the deal over Netanyahu, in his own words, on the record. And Iran knew Trump would choose the deal, because Iran had read Trump's incentive structure correctly from the beginning. Trump's legacy, Trump's economic relief for American voters paying record gas prices, Trump's ability to claim he ended a war that was becoming politically costly at home, all of it runs through a successful deal with Iran. Netanyahu's continued operations threatened that deal, so when Trump had to choose, the choice was already made. Iran did not make that choice for Trump. Iran just created the conditions where Trump had to make it himself. That is not military victory. That is strategic genius. Part 4. 3 theories. Which one does the evidence actually support? I want to put 3 competing explanations on the table and examine each one honestly and fairly, because intellectual honesty requires giving the strongest version of every argument before deciding which one the evidence best supports. Theory 1. Trump is genuinely angry and the warning is real. This theory says the public fracture between Trump and Netanyahu is genuine, not performance, not theater. Real frustration producing a real warning with real consequences. The evidence for this is substantial. Al Jazeera reported that Trump has grown increasingly exasperated with Netanyahu over recent weeks. Axios reported that Trump called Netanyahu on Sunday evening specifically asking him not to retaliate after Iran's missile launches. Netanyahu launched anyway. Trump then confirmed publicly that Israel gave him very late notice, that the strikes were already in the air when he found out. He says he managed to limit but not fully stop the operation. He then publicly warned Netanyahu on the record. This is not the behavior of an actor performing exasperation for the cameras. The specific details, late notice, already in the air, I had it limited, these are the kinds of operational details that a president publicly humiliated by an ally would share. They are face-saving details. They say, "I tried to stop this and I partially succeeded." This theory is strong. It has internal logic. It has supporting evidence. I will not dismiss it. But here is what it cannot explain. If Trump is genuinely furious at Netanyahu, if American support is genuinely becoming conditional, why did every single American military asset continue operating in full support of Israel immediately after the supposed humiliation? The Aegis destroyers in the eastern Mediterranean kept tracking Iranian missiles. American intelligence kept feeding Israeli strike packages. American CENTCOM kept enforcing the naval blockade. Not one piece of American military support was withdrawn or even temporarily suspended. You do not continue to fully protect someone who just embarrassed you on the global stage, unless you were not actually embarrassed, or unless the embarrassment was acceptable because the larger operation was still proceeding as planned. Theory 2. The theater of consent is still running. This theory says the public disagreement between Trump and Netanyahu is performance. Both sides are playing different roles for different audiences, while the strategic coordination continues underneath. Trump needs one image for American voters and for the international community: the peacemaker, the dealmaker, the man desperately trying to end a war that is costing American consumers at the gas pump. Netanyahu needs a completely different image for Israeli voters going into a competitive election: the sovereign warrior who does not bow to any foreign pressure, who acts on Israeli interests alone. The public spat gives both sides exactly the domestic narrative they need. Trump gets footage of himself calling Netanyahu and demanding a stop. Netanyahu gets footage of himself acting independently, regardless of Washington's preferences. And underneath the theater, the strategic coordination continues uninterrupted. CNN reported that Trump told Netanyahu, "I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt the deal, but you have to use your own judgment." That is not a hard ultimatum. That is not a genuine red line. That is Trump giving Netanyahu maximum flexibility while maintaining his own public image as the peacemaker. Use your own judgment is the language of a patron giving a client operational freedom, not the language of a patron genuinely threatening to withdraw support. This theory is also strong. The evidence is real. Theory 3. Iran forced the split. And both previous theories miss the point. This is where I want to take you. Because theories 1 and 2 are both asking the wrong question. They are both asking, is the Trump-Netanyahu fracture real or performed? The right question is, who created the conditions that made this fracture necessary? And the answer to that question is Iran. Iran set Lebanon as its red line, knowing Israel would cross it. Iran's automatic mosaic defense responded exactly as publicly advertised, giving Iran maximum credibility while removing the need for any dangerous real-time political decision in Tehran. Iran's response was precise enough to demonstrate full operational capability, but controlled enough not to trigger the kind of escalation that would have forced full American military involvement. And Iran paused, without any external pressure compelling it, at exactly the moment that created maximum pressure on Trump to choose between Netanyahu and the deal. Every step of that sequence was designed to put Trump in a position where defending Netanyahu unconditionally cost more than distancing from him. And it worked. Iran did not fire a single missile on June 9th. It did not need to. Part 5. The deal and what Iran actually agreed to. CNN reported that Trump is confident the United States could be sealing a deal with Iran within days. He said the deal would allow the Strait of Hormuz to reopen and ban Iran from having nuclear weapons. Now, I want to examine what this deal actually looks like from Iran's perspective, because the framing in American media is almost completely backwards. American media frames this as America forcing Iran to accept humiliating terms, Iran surrendering its nuclear ambitions, Iran giving up Hormuz control, Iran accepting defeat. But look at what Iran actually has as it enters these final negotiations. Iran has a published strategic doctrine that makes its response to any attack on the axis of resistance automatic and guaranteed. That doctrine does not disappear when a deal is signed. It remains active. Iran has demonstrated full ballistic missile capability despite months of American and Israeli strikes. Trump publicly told NBC News that Iran retained only 21 to 22% of its pre-war missile stockpile. But classified American intelligence assessments, according to reporting at the time, put Iran's actual remaining capability at 70%. The gap between those two numbers tells you something important about the reliability of official American assessments of Iranian military capacity. Iran has its Lebanon red line still publicly active. Any Israeli military operation in Lebanon after a deal is signed would automatically reactivate Iran's mosaic defense, which means the deal is only as durable as Israeli restraint in Lebanon. And Israeli restraint in Lebanon is only as durable as Netanyahu's domestic political calculations. And Iran has now publicly established, through the Trump-Netanyahu fracture it engineered, that American backing of Israel is conditional, that there is a limit, that if Netanyahu pushes too far, Trump will publicly distance himself. Al Jazeera reported that Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson blamed Washington directly for the escalation, saying the United States is directly responsible, as they are party to the ceasefire negotiations. Therefore, any act in violation of the ceasefire is a violation America owns. Iran is entering these final deal negotiations having established that America is responsible for Israeli behavior, which means if Israel violates the deal, Iran can hold America accountable, not just Israel. That is not a surrendering negotiating position. That is a position of accumulated strategic leverage that Iran built step by step over 48 hours without firing a single missile on June 9th. Part 6. The helicopter and the detail. Nobody is discussing. There is one development from the last 24 hours that I want to bring to your attention, specifically because of what it might signal, and because the official response has been notably brief. CNN reported that a United States Army helicopter went down near the Strait of Hormuz. Trump confirmed the incident, saying the pilots are fine, and that more information would be made public in the coming hours. One American military helicopter, near the most strategically sensitive maritime choke point on the planet, during active ceasefire negotiations. During a period when Iranian strategic doctrine publicly commits to automatic responses to perceived aggression, Trump confirmed it happened. He said pilots are fine. He said more information is coming. I am not speculating about the cause. Mechanical failures happen. Accidents happen. But in a conflict where every detail is strategically significant, where every event carries potential escalatory weight, where both sides are simultaneously negotiating a deal and maintaining military pressure, a downed American military helicopter near Hormuz is the kind of detail that serious analysts do not dismiss as coincidence until the full picture is clear. Watch how the administration characterizes this incident in the coming 24 to 48 hours. Watch whether the language shifts from accident to incident. Watch whether the location is described more precisely. The words that officials choose, and the words they deliberately avoid, will tell you far more than the official statement itself. Part 7. what the historical pattern says about this moment. I want to pull back now and look at the much larger picture. Because what is happening on June 9th, 2026, is not just a diplomatic development. It is a data point in a historical pattern that serious analysts of American foreign policy have been watching for decades. There is a recurring pattern in American military engagements in the Middle East that goes back at least to the 1980s. America enters a conflict with overwhelming military superiority. America defines victory in conventional military terms: destroyed facilities, degraded capacity, enemy forces eliminated. And then America finds, consistently, that the adversary it is fighting does not define victory the same way. Vietnam defined victory as survival long enough for American domestic political will to collapse. Hezbollah in 2006 defined victory as surviving Israeli military operations while inflicting enough casualties to make continuation politically unsustainable for Jerusalem. The Taliban defined victory as simply waiting, just waiting, for 20 years if necessary, and now Iran is demonstrating that it has absorbed those lessons completely. Iran is not trying to match American military power. Iran is not trying to win a conventional military engagement. Iran is trying to survive long enough, at a cost low enough, while making the cost of continuing high enough that the political and economic calculus in Washington shifts. And the Trump warning to Netanyahu is evidence that the calculus is shifting, not because Iran won militarily, but because Iran made the cost of the current trajectory. For American voters at the gas pump, for American allies calculating the reliability of American security guarantees, for Trump's legacy and deal-making credibility, progressively higher than the cost of a negotiated exit. That is the North Korea model applied at a more sophisticated level and on a more globally integrated scale than Kim Jong-un ever managed. And the 6 words Trump said to Netanyahu are the clearest evidence yet that it is working. 3 things to watch. Al Jazeera reported that Tehran warned strikes will resume if Israel continues its aggression, including in Lebanon. Watch whether Israel actually reduces its military operations in Lebanon over the next 72 hours. This is the single clearest indicator of whether Trump's warning to Netanyahu has genuine teeth or is purely performative theater. If Israel slows down operations in Lebanon, Trump's warning was real. Washington communicated privately to Tel Aviv that the demonstration was sufficient, that the deal takes priority, and that Netanyahu needs to stand down regardless of his domestic political needs. If Israel continues at the same operational tempo in Lebanon, the theater of consent is still running, the public fracture is performance, and Iran's automatic response mechanism will activate again within hours of the next Dahieh strike. Watch the exact language of any deal announcement, specifically whether it contains explicit limitations on Israeli military operations in Lebanon. CNN reported that Trump's described deal would allow Hormuz to reopen and ban Iran from nuclear weapons, but Iran has made Lebanon the non-negotiable condition for any durable peace. If the deal language does not address Lebanon in specific and enforceable terms, the deal will not survive the first Israeli military operation in Lebanese territory after signing. And watch whether Iranian officials confirm the same deal terms in their own domestic statements that Trump describes in his. In this conflict, the gap between what American officials say Iran agreed to and what Iranian officials say they agreed to has been consistent and significant. When Trump says Iran agreed not to have nuclear weapons, watch whether Khamenei's office or the IRGC confirm that specific language. The gap between those two statements is where the durability of this deal actually lives. One final question. On June 8, 2026, Donald Trump said, "I call the shots. Netanyahu has no choice." On June 9, 2026, Donald Trump said, "Bibi, you better be careful or you will be on your own very soon." The same man, 24 hours apart, 2 completely different signals to the same audience. And Iran did not fire a single missile on June 9th to cause that shift. So let me ask you the question that nobody on cable television is willing to ask directly. If Iran is truly as broken as Washington claims, no navy, no air force, no economy, 250% inflation, nuclear facilities destroyed, 7 million displaced, how does a broken country in 48 hours force the President of the United States to publicly warn his closest ally that American support has limits, without firing a single additional missile, without a single additional diplomatic communication that Washington acknowledged, by simply setting a trap, waiting for Israel to walk into it, and letting Trump's own deal obsession do the rest? Because what Iran just demonstrated on June 9, 2026, is not a missile capability. It is not a nuclear threshold. It is not even the Hormuz switch. It is something more dangerous than any of those things. It is the demonstration that Iran understands the decision-making architecture of the American political system better than Netanyahu does. That Iran can use Trump's own priorities as a lever against Israeli military operations. That in the final calculation, When Trump had to choose between Netanyahu and the deal, Iran already knew the answer before Trump did. And a country that can predict your decisions before you make them is not losing the war. It is fighting a completely different war, one that no Patriot missile battery, no Aegis destroyer, no bunker buster bomb was ever designed to win. And that is the story that nobody is telling you tonight.